Alrighty, Morgan Snyder, how you doing tonight, sir?
Hey, good to be with you guys. Thanks
Yes,
for hosting me to be with your tribe.
absolutely. Thank you for coming on to the show. As always, thanks for being a listener. And we kind of just want to get right into it. Before we start getting into your book, we like to break the ice a little bit with some questions. So Taylor's going to hit you with one, and then I will get the jitters off, and then we'll get into your
Awesome.
testimony and all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Let's get the mind rolling a little bit. So I would say, what is your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, Dances with Wolves.
Oh,
Uh, the story, it's an old one now. Well, because I'm an old one actually now. I don't know how it happened. But yeah, I think the brilliance of watching a man who has whispers in his soul of who he was meant to be, and he finds himself living in a terrible version of what he was intended to be. Right, Kevin Costner. He's John Dunbar. He's a warrior. He knows he wants to fight for something greater, but he has a native soul, and he's seeing things of powerful men. And it relates to becoming a king, really, of men in power
Hmm.
that mishandle it.
I love
And
that.
he starts asking questions in that beautiful scene where there's a sort of death, and you don't know if it's actually a suicide or it's courage. But there's some death of an old man, and he's reborn to dances with wolves and gets his heart back and brings love and finds the deeper things. And I wouldn't mind living in a teepee myself. So
I love that.
I get, yeah.
I'm,
How about you?
I'm not.
Real
Oh,
quick.
That's a good. Okay, so I would. Man, my favorite movie of all time is actually Sneakers. If you've ever seen it
Okay.
with Robert Redford,
Okay.
love that
A
movie.
lot. Yes,
Like
yes.
heist movies and stuff. That's like my favorite. And so most people don't even know what that is. Robert Redford's probably one of my favorite actors of all time. And yeah, Sneakers is probably my favorite movie.
nice. I'm gonna go really fast so that way I don't get asked that question because I don't watch like any TV. So I'm not a big TV guy. I just had the question and I started thinking of my favorite video in case you asked me. Now I can't think of it. Oh yeah, what is next on your bucket list? Like, what's something you've been itching to do and you haven't gotten around to it yet?
Oh man, I am dreaming about enticing my daughter to want to learn how to fly fish this summer.
Ooh.
Okay.
And she's turning 13 next week. My son turns 16 the next week, and with my son, there's just natural affinity of like we have the same jam. You know, he's bow hunting with me when he was 2.5 years old, and he's
Love
my
it.
favorite person to adventure with. And my daughter has this wild heart, but she's cut from a different cloth. And so I'm really trying to tune into God. Like, what is your plan for her? And how do I participate in what you have for her as a growing young woman? And man, I've misfired on some different things where I haven't found the cadence. And so I am dreaming that fly fishing might be something that taps into her love for beauty and adventure. That I can get her out on some trails and get her casting and fly tying, and we did our first lesson a couple weeks ago and it was good. So I'm hoping to do that this summer.
That's awesome.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's dig into your testimony. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and maybe your bring up and all, and before we get into your book?
Yeah, Brandon. So I would say I grew up a really passionate guy, pretty driven towards achievement, and I was looking for life. And I grew up in a family that was loving, but did not have God at its center. It wasn't a view of reality that was God initiated, God breathed. And so I kind of chased all the things I could find that I thought would bring me life. And I did pretty well. I won the leadership game. I won the women game. I won the academic game. And I graduated, beautiful wife, 4.0, her beautiful girlfriend, 4.0, student government president. And I remember looking in the mirror and saying, I've won the world and lost my soul.
Hmm.
I looked in the mirror and I saw just fake. I had won, but I knew it was the wrong game. And I had this fear that night, if I die, like, what would I say to God? I feel like I wasted it all. And so I knew the answer was God. but the religion that I was exposed to wasn't any more life than what I sought after. You know, the human heart will gravitate towards the biggest, best story it can find. And in high school, getting drunk and getting laid and being a big deal, that was a big story because I didn't have the gospel as a gospel of life. And so I found God and came to Christ, a pretty radical conversion in college. But I think what's important is I found myself after that with a genuine faith, but I was in a man's body, yet I was a boy inside. I was still immature. I was still lacking initiation. I was still lacking the fathering that the soul needed. And becoming a Christian, coming into a genuine faith in God, didn't solve all that. I just threw a lot of my brokenness into Christian activity. And so the story of my last 25 years is a story of then pursuing the things in response to God's fathering, where I could become a son with a loving father, become a man through a process of slow and steady initiation, of increasing healing, increasing wholeheartedness, and becoming the kind of man in whom God can entrust more and more of the care of his kingdom. And so I think my story is one of just being really honest about motive and about really the masculine soul as a landscape and a process, and not just these fixed moments of kind of like a static story that's stuck in time.
That's so good. That's like so relatable. There's like so many points that I'm like, dang, like I get it. Like ding, ding, ding. Like that is awesome.
What do you think? Pick one, Taylor. Like as I share that for you guys, what comes up?
So the first thing that, like when you said that, the first thing that hit me like deeply was when you talk about like converting and then like being like, I want to be all in, but not being like mature enough to really like understand what that necessarily means, and like and mature enough just naturally, but also mature enough like in my faith to realize how like what that means to like get deeper into like what my soul needs and how to like dive into that, and how to even mature spiritually, I guess, even, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to find what that even means. You know what I mean? Like, and so that, like, I get that on a deep level. That's awesome.
Yeah. We started talking about film, and there's a brilliant film, Mask of Zorro. If you've seen that before, every great, it. There you go.
I got that one.
Okay, good. Every great story borrows its power from the gospel.
Sure, 100%.
Every great story, its story is embedded in our common story. And in that, you have young Zorro that's really gifted. He's a warrior, right? And he picks a fight with a guy that needs his ass kicked, frankly.
Right.
And older Zorro steps in and saves him. And younger Zorro says to him, like, come on, that Captain Love, I need to fight that guy. And he's like, I would have fought bravely. And older Zorro says, yes, you would have fought bravely, and you would have died quickly. Because he is trained to fight. You seem to be rather trained to drink. Right? And it was a picture of what's in you is really good. Right? The most important thing we can ever know about any human being is they bear the image of God. It's more important to know than their story, than their sin, than their brokenness. They bear the image of God. And because when you know that's in there, then that's what's core to who they are. And that helps us recover their identity from the person they have become. Yeah. Right? The most important thing about a person is not what they do. It's not their title. It's not their job. It's who they become. And so initiation is a process of steadying maturity. And it isn't just age. It's actually spiritual maturity. And it's so important to think of our faith journey not as just there are Christians and there are non-Christians and we need to evangelize. It's a gospel of salvation and also a gospel of restoration. And that's how that's an orientation that will help us better interpret what God's bringing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point. Like that, I mean, sanctification is the process of trying to look more and more like Jesus every day, like essentially. And so like living that journey out. I love that.
Right, and I like how it related to the Zorro reference and Brothers of Merit and what we do, because it was actually like that mentor type figure that we've talked about multiple times on our show about having that mentor in the brotherhood stance of our faith. Like I get someone older than me who has been there, done that type thing, so he can look at young Zorro and say, "Hey, man, this is not your battle right now. You're going to lose.
Yes.
Here's why, and let me help coach you through why, so that you can, have that victory later down the line."
Yeah.
So that was a perfect like reference. As soon as you said it, I haven't seen the movie in years. I mean, I'm 29 basically, and I haven't seen it since I was like 6 on VHS.
The last time
in the
you
90s,
watched
but
movies.
yeah, the last time I watched movies. That and the Mighty Ducks. That was the last thing I remember.
Awesome.
It's really... go ahead. No, it's the lag sometimes. Go ahead.
In a piece with that's so beautiful is that the father needs the son as much as the son needs the father. The teacher needs the student as much as the student needs the teacher. And I found that in this story over the last 2 decades is when I bring honest questions to older men, there's a dignity that's bestowed. Well, you're validating their place of honoring the miles, because you guys know we live in a culture that worships youth.
Yeah.
And we live in an instant culture that no longer values process. We live in an information culture that no longer values wisdom. But there's a way things work. Leverage works both ways. We saw that in the crash of 2008. Leverage works both ways. And in God's economy, there are no shortcuts.
Right.
The kingdom of God, it's not quick, it's not cheap, it's not easy, but it's life. It's life as it was meant to be, and there's more and more life available, but it requires consenting to a path and a process over time. It's wisdom's long view with a beginner's mindset. So I'm so glad that, you guys do so much emphasis on the idea of being a mentor and being mentored by others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's, like I said, that's what Brothers of Merit's about, is just digging in deeper into that faith journey with Christ and the other men you surround yourself with.
Yep.
So could you tell us, as we transition here, about a little bit about your book, Becoming a King, and why you wrote it? What was the story maybe behind it, and your drive?
Yeah. It ties into that first story. So I found myself young, loving God, and overnight it felt like my kingdom was expanding. In other words, that which was entrusted to my care. I had a young wife and young kids and a young career, and I was trying to serve God, and we're going after hearts around the world in ministry. And externally, it looked really good. And now it's for God. Right now, I am a leader, and I'm a shaper of shapers and a visionary. And so I was doing that for God. But below the surface, that's not how I felt. If I was honest, fear was present. If I was honest, there was a lot of sense of scarcity. It was never enough. I always felt behind. And I couldn't really even name it, but sometimes it's like behind in my fitness, behind in my relationships, behind in my finances, behind in my yard work, whatever it is, I'm behind. I'm not enough, right? And I was always building. And so I could see the check engine lights on my soul, and I had to decide, am I going to pay attention to them? And enough pain and realizing I'm in a different decade where my life matters to other people. My decisions have consequences. I didn't like the disconnect between the external and the internal. And so I started seeking after God and said, God, what is life about? Like, help me find the way, because externally I'm doing what I think I should, and internally, like, I'm not well. What are the pitfalls? What are the core desires that I need to chase? Like, what is the path? What is the most important thing? And for a couple weeks, it was silence. And even in the silence, looking back now, it was God saying, I really want you to dive into your questions. And then I sensed God saying, I want to speak to that, but I want to speak through older men. I want you to find the wisest, oldest men you know and ask them your questions, and I will speak through their questions. So I got pencil, paper, and wrote out a first letter to a friend. And some letters came in from far away, other countries or states, in the form of correspondence. Sometimes it was an awesome beer or cigar around a campfire. And in time, over 2 years, I had gathered the counsel of over 75 older men. And I sat in this council. And you guys, what I began to discover is that there were these universal themes of an upside down kingdom where the world says build. The world says make a name for yourself, get something going, make a little money. The kingdom of God says excavate. Allow God to do the work to build you into the kind of man that can be entrusted. The world says do it the cheapest, quickest way. The kingdom of God says there's no shortcuts. The world says make it happen, it's up to you. The kingdom of God says there's a Father that's orchestrating your story, and your task is to respond to his invitation. And so it was this collective wisdom that just caused me to rest. And I went from feeling behind to feeling on time. I went from feeling pressure to consenting to being a student, to giving myself permission for the first time in my life to be young. And so the story of the next decade of my life was setting myself under trustworthy men and taking the lower seat at the table and focusing on the excavation over the building. You know, it's been said by Mike Mason that the heart of a man is like a densely populated city. Nothing can be built in its center without something else being first torn down. So it was a time of tearing down. It was a time of hiddenness. And in that time, what I came to find is the most important thing about a person isn't what they do, it's who they become. And I want my life to be about becoming the kind of man that can be entrusted with much. And so over time, God made it impossible not to share. And I did it on a very small scale. I found like-hearted young men like you, and we gathered together. We sat in the council. We unpacked our stories. We prayed for each other. And over time, I wanted to continue to fuel those guys. And so I started podcasts and blogs featuring the counsel of these elders, featuring these treasures that I distilled and curated. And the fruit over 20 years was God inviting me to put the content in the form that was accessible to reach the many and find the few. And so the book, the video, the study guide, the heart behind it was every generation loses the gospel of life, and every generation is charged with its recovery. And we are losing it in this generation, and we are recovering it. And it always happens with a few tribal on the fringes of culture. And I want to find those men and want to help see them thrive.
I love that so much. And
that is spot on. I don't know if I took the words out of your mouth, no, but I as soon as you said the reference about the heart, about it being like a city of like tearing it down and having like to build something to the core of it, something has to be broken down like that. I mean, out of Brothers of Merit, the three of us that do this ministry, I'm the most infant in my faith journey. Like I'm probably 4 years in now to truly thinking I know who my God is, and obviously we all are striving for that every day. But when you said that, when I based my faith initially, when I started my walk, the hardest thing to do to accept him was to break down all the bad habits, as you will, and sin that surrounded my heart to get him to the center. So like, I just saw my last 4 years like flash right before my eyes when you said that. Like, that's not even a joke, man. Like, this is, I'm just loving listening to you talk because it's spot for real. Freaking on.
My neck's getting sore. Just like, nah.
And Brandon, what I want to just reflect back to you is like, part of that is the Father validating that you've done the work for 4 years, right? Those are no easy days. That's hard and holy work. And most likely in your vocational world, you're swimming upstream with people thinking you're crazy, right? Like yet, when I was in that position like you, and I was asking those questions and I was curious, and I knew there was another way, but I wasn't sure what it looked like. You know, one kind mentor stepped in and he said, here's the deal. find the men in their 40s and 50s and 60s and ask the question, what took them out? What took them out? Because they were just like you when they were 29. They wanted what you wanted. What happened? And if they were like you, how will you not end up like them? And it was really sobering because I went, oh my goodness, no one sets out to have an affair. Sure. No one sets out for a bankruptcy. No one sets out to have kids and then be totally checked out to them for 15 years. And I started looking at the patterns, and so much of it surrounded by the work and the woman. And I don't say the woman objectively. I mean this whole category of what do we do with our longing to be loved by a woman and to fight for a woman. And at the same time, the mess of moving towards a woman in love and having so much dysfunction surface from within us. And so I saw these patterns and I said, I don't want to end up there. And so I need to do the work today. And so I just want to reflect back to you, like your father sees you and he's saying like, well done, well done. Like you see clearly and you're becoming aware of your own soul. And most people just shut it down and ignore it until it blows up. And you don't have to waste your pain. But, one mentor in the process said, there's really only two choices. One is humility. The other is humiliation. But there's not a third choice. And so which do you want? Humility or humiliation? And a lot of men have to suffer a lot to get to the point where they say, I choose humility. Not as acquiescence, not as weakness, but as strength harnessed by something and someone greater.
And I think just one of the things that came up when you were talking about, like talking to the men that like what happened to you, like one of the first things that kind of like that hit me, because I don't know, I'm sure, and I don't want to answer for you, like please tell me like the answer to the question, but like I'm sure it that came out of it, yes, sobering, but then I don't know, like because that's where I find myself, right, 29. And like I've thought through that and I've read the books that are like the way to do this is to like get the internet out of your house and like live in fear, basically, like put yourself a jail around you so that nothing can happen, and if you like remove yourself as far away from situations as possible, then nothing's gonna happen. But it's more like there's like freedom in doing the work then like gets you actually closer to where your heart's in a place where you can get there, right? Like you don't have to live in fear and be like, well, like everyone that I've talked to that's 40, 50, and 60 has an answer to the question, what happened, because something went wrong, right? Like, so how do I avoid that? Well, like if I just keep living in fear, like more than likely what they did, that's probably going to be my story. But if I do the work, there's freedom in the fact that I can trudge through that. And I don't have to, someone's coming to me then when I'm 60 and saying like, how'd you get here? Like, how do I follow that same path?
Well, and that sort of counsel, right, of just shut the world out and just sequester yourself. The sad reality is it completely neglects the heart.
Right.
It neglects the masculine soul, right? Like Brandon, you were commenting on, the heart doesn't go away. And so when you shut it down and you disconnect it from your faith, it goes underground and it pops up in terribly painful ways. It doesn't mean that the heart's evil. It means that it actually matters. And a life without heart is not a life worth living. And so what if that heart is actually good? What if what you really want was from God? Right? Because what's so hopeful is you can become the kind of person where your secret life moves from a place of shame and isolation to your greatest strength. You can become that person because that's who you're made to be. Identity is a powerful thing. And you guys and your listeners out there, just to know, we do not live beyond our identity. Whatever we have come to believe about who we are, that's inevitably who we will become. So if you're a sinner saved by grace, sadly, in time, you will never live beyond sin because the identity is sinner. And so if you're a sinner, well, what do sinners do? Sin. But that's not true. That's not what the scriptures say. The scripture says you're given a new heart. Paul goes around to all of his fellowships of these warriors and he calls them saints. He says it's like sons of Scotland, like Wallace evoking the men of Braveheart, right? You are the son. You're not slaves. You are the sons of Scotland. Well, Paul's looking, he goes, saints in Ephesus, saints in Corinth, the saints in Philippi. He says, I know who you are. Oh yeah, that thing over there that you're struggling with, that's a big deal and we need to deal with it. But that's not the truest thing. The truest thing is your heart matters. Your heart is designed in the image of God. And if you care for that heart, you become the kind of person that actually wants the good. And the other piece with that is we talk about that we compartmentalize Christianity and make it tips and techniques, and we neglect the heart, and then guys blow up. Well, they blow up because they become entrusted with more and more power and more kingdom, but their heart is not well. And under pressure, they end up, and the pressure below it is simply pain out of a wounded boy. They go sideways. But instead, when you cultivate that heart, you begin to decompartmentalize your faith, and it becomes the lens by which you see all things. One very wise man was asked by some young men like you guys, they said, how do you spend your quiet time? How do you stay in God and in the Word every day for your 15 minutes? And this wise sage said, I believe God is rather unconcerned with your 15-minute quiet time. He is far more concerned with what it is you do the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of your day. And he went on to say, we must arrange our days so that we are experiencing increasing joy and contentment in our everyday life with God. And if we go after that, we get the gospel and we get joy. It's all one experience of a life worth living.
Wow, I love it.
I got
So much.
Morgan, I gotta say honestly, you're the first person we've interviewed that I have actually like teared up.
I know.
I'm just gonna be like, I'm glad Taylor asked the last question because I couldn't even talk. Like when you were talking to me, it was just like, yeah, I can't talk right now. So.
So Brandon, then before we go, because the temptation is to minimize it, right? The temptation is to be like, sweet, move on. Like, let's just go there for a minute. What are the tears? What touched you? What does it evoke in your soul?
Oh man. I'll try to do it without tearing up again. I think the way you were talking like at me in a way was that I am enough, if that sounds not weird to anyone. Like I am enough to him, because a lot of times we go about this world and we mess up, whether it's everyday life or being a father or a husband and firefighter like I am and all, and you feel like you're not adding up or amounting to what he wants for you in a way, like you were saying, like you're not enough, and you were like validating me in a way that it is okay, and where I'm at, like all this the 4+ years, like that was him speaking to me, saying like, you are where I want you to be, like you have come through this like exactly how I wanted you to. So it was pretty cool, because I did not live the perfect line growing up. A lot of us didn't, but I had like no faith based. So there's a lot of things I don't want to say I regret, because they led me to like my wife and my kids, but I definitely think about them a lot.
Yes.
So you addressing that and just saying it made me think like it's okay, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and even that, Brandon, first of all, that your heart's in a place that you can receive the validation, that's huge. Because most men shut down. But, if you don't receive, you cannot offer what you've not received. And we will treat people the same way we treat our own heart over time. And we try to do it differently. We try to say, oh yeah, fighting for guys and do these things, but inside you're beating yourself up. It's never good enough. I'm not enough. I've got to work harder. over time, people will feel that same thing from you, from us. But when we learn to receive love, when we receive the Father's love, then we're able to bestow it. Then we're able to let it literally embody us. And so what I want to suggest is, first of all, your heart's really open. You've done the work. You're receiving it. And it's such a good practice to pause and ask the Father, practice listening prayer to say, Father, what's your interpretation on this? Father, what's your counsel for me? Father, what name do you have for me? What are you speaking into this situation? The number of times when my kids were young and I would drive home from work, and I learned the hard way, but in time I'd stop the car before I got to my house. I'd just stop somewhere. Few minutes, let my day go. So I just give this all to you, God. I give everything to you. And I say, God, what do you want to say about my day? What do you want to affirm? What do you want to point out? What do you want to celebrate? And then what do I need to know about what I'm stepping into? Like the weight coming off my shoulders to practice. I have a Father that's got this. I have a Father that's got more than enough. And I have a Father that the major theme is he is celebrating my victories. He's celebrating my heart. He's celebrating the unseen sacrifices. He knows my story, and he's warring on my behalf. But to practice asking, to practice listening, John 8:38 says, those that belong to God, hear what God says. You belong to God. If you've given your confidence over to him and you trust him, you have the ears to hear. God is always speaking. The greatest challenge is, are we growing in capacity to listen and receive? And the more we practice, the more we become the kind of person that can really hear. And that's the greatest fuel we'll ever receive.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. It's going to cry again, so I'm going to ask another question. Man, holy moly. I literally so same time next week. Like we don't even need to push record. This has just been the coolest interview I think we've ever done. I love it so much.
I was not expecting this.
So from the for the sake of time and everything, the question we ask all of our guests is, what's your advice on brotherhood? So we've mentioned mentorship, and you've talked about how you went to 75 people older than you to get their advice and everything. And we've mentioned mentorship, but there's also brotherhood, side by side, rubbing shoulders with guys that are directly next to you. And so we just wanted to ask, what's your advice for the people that are listening about brotherhood and what that means to you and what you could bestow upon them?
Yeah, it's a really important question, because you reach a point in life where if you're unwilling to settle for the life that you're made for, you cannot have it without authentic brotherhood. Yeah. You just can't. You can engineer a small life like most men do, where they're the center of their story and they live without friends. But truly, a man is made to sharpen the soul of another man. Right? We're formed by mother and we're forged by father. And so much of that happens in masculine fellowship. I think the two pieces of counsel I'd give that have been most forming for me is, one mentor said, find like-hearted kings living in the same direction, sign treaties, and when they are at war, you are at war. There's a lot to unpack in that, but it's got to be the like-hearted, and they're got to be living in the same direction to want what you want and have to fight through the same crap to get it. And you sign treaties, and you can only do treaties in war with a few. You can't fight a multi-front war, right? But you sign treaties, and when they are at war, you are at war. It first comes about, how can I love them? How can I come through for them? How can I care for them? And in that, you can't you love what you value. You love who you value. And so you have to get to know each other's stories. I got to know you guys a little bit by, being familiar with your podcast and looking online at some pieces. Well, I know you so much better from our time face to face and soul to soul here. Like, I'm ready to have beers and hang out and talk story and adventure. Like, because we're relating, right?
Yeah.
We're soul to soul. We're brother to brother. We're being authentic.
Yeah.
And so you have to share your stories to know and be known. And the second piece that I'd offer by way of counsel is a lot of men for 20 years have said, it's just hard finding good men, right? It's just hard. Like, it's hard. The world is a crazy place. But the first task is becoming the kind of man that someone else would really want to be brothers with. It changes everything. It goes from having this grid of, hey, it's like church shopping. It's like, is that my kind of guy? Do we have interests in common? It's all the focus is on like evaluation. When we become the kind of person that someone else would want to be brothers with, we won't find the problem of not having brothers. The problem will be the discernment of who do we sign treaties with. But that mutual love, that mutual heroism to say, I'm keeping my side of the street clean. You can count on me that I'm doing the work. That just like you guys, what I trust is if we don't connect for a year, when we come back a year from now, we're all going to have stories of how we've grown because we've gone after the things of God and his kingdom, and we'll be stronger for it, and we'll have more to offer to each other. And so for a guy out there, I would say start with, what kind of friend do you want? Become that kind of man.
Yeah. That's awesome. Wow. I love it so much.
So yeah, Morgan, thank you so much for this interview. I don't even know, like, it wasn't even, I say interview loosely because it was just an awesome conversation where you flip things back on Taylor and I that is rarely like ever
100%.
done. Like, we're always just interviewing somebody. So I thank you. Like, that I needed to hear 150% what you just said these past 40 minutes. Like, I needed that.
Good.
A lot.
Well, we're in it together. That's what it's for. We're a fellowship, and it's a few. And you guys, it's always been a few. Like, don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. It's always been a few. And there was a tribe of 12 guys that led a revolution that changed human history more than anything else humanity's ever seen for the good. It was 12 guys. Like, you're doing it. And I think one of the things the Father just wants to speak to you and to your tribe of listeners out there, like, you're not alone. There are others that want it, and it's seeding the globe, and you have peers, so don't lose heart.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Can you just let our listeners know before we go where they can find your book at? So that way if they want to find it and buy it.
And your podcast and everything. Things that are coming out.
Just plug everything. That way they can find you.
Everything that we talked about in this time, it's all pieces that are deeply embedded in Becoming a King, the book, the video series, the study guide, and then there's a blog and podcast, and all of that. It's just, there's more. I think what I just want to say to the hearts of these men out there is there's more. It's available. All of this was just introduction. And with it comes so much joy, and it's worth it. You can find it all at becomingaking.com is the website.
That's awesome.
Okay. Awesome.
So I actually have one more question at the end, because we interviewed John Eldridge a couple weeks ago, and I thought of this question like as we were like wrapping up, and I said it afterwards, and Mike and Brandon were like, "Oh, you should have asked it." And then you just brought up fatherhood again, and so I'm gonna ask you this question. So, like, Wild at Heart and everything that you talked about, you said like you're formed by the mother and forged by the father, and so like obviously like fatherhood and your father and as men being a father is such a crucial role in everyone's life, daughters and sons, everything. Like, I guess, do you think that if we were a generation that got that right, if like wild at heart and becoming a king, like, does that even need to exist anymore? Because like the father's got it right, and now like, you know what I mean? And so A, and then B, is that even possible?
Totally possible.
Yeah.
Ephesians 1 says Jesus has this under reign. He's a power that raised the dead, and he holds it all together. So make no mistake, you turn on the internet, it looks like most things gone to hell in a handbasket. I mean, it's gone sideways, right? And save yourself is the mentality. But make no mistake, we're only part way in a story. We're only part way in a story. But I think what's helpful to get to that question, Taylor, is like C.S. Lewis had this fascinating statement I so appreciate. He said, I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun rising. I believe it because I see the sun rising every day. But by the sun, I see all other things. I think it can be said the same of the Father, that every man, as I started the conversation, bears the image of God as a man. Yeah. That's the most true thing, and you will be a man for eternity. And that's really important to know. And in a broken world, what happens is we fundamentally try to make masculinity work apart from a father. And so what you meet when you meet a man is an elaborate fig leaf and a boy in a man's body that's living a lot out of an identity of fear, of slavery, or shame of an orphan. And that's why so much of men have that feeling, like we were talking about, Brandon, of life is up to me, I'm behind, I need to make it happen. Failure and fear are never far away. And that is simply a view of reality that's not centered in the love of a father. And that's not what Jesus models. Jesus, whatever else we learn from his life, he is modeling what it looks like to live as a son. Jesus modeled utter dependency. That's a crazy thing, because we think of Jesus as kind of this autonomous holy guy in a white robe that can do crazy shit that we can't do. Right. Like, that's simply not true. Okay? Right. He was a normal human being that had a father. But he had a father-centered view of reality, so much so that he said, I pray, Father, that they would be one with you as I'm one with you, that these, my sons, my disciples, would be one heart with you, Father, and one mind with you, Father, as we are one heart and mind. He had a father-centered view of reality. And so when a man is maturing, he comes to a point where he has to renounce the independence, where, Christian or not, he's come to make life work apart from a father. And when we come to risk believing that in some ways, big or small, we have learned the Father wrong, and we have to learn God as Father, not as he is, not as we've learned him, but as he truly is. And it starts by simply pausing and saying, God, I confess. I know there are ways that I've not lived as a son. And so I ask that you would come. You are my Father. I am your son. And I invite you to father me today. That's available to any man and every man on any day before he gets out of his bed, before he sits up. The one thing that's available to us on any day is you can cry out, God, you're a father. I'm your son. That's who you made me to be. And so I choose to receive you as a father today. I will let you be my father. I want to learn who you truly are. And that shift is the shift that makes all other shifts possible. It's the sun by which we see. And so I do believe, Taylor, with deep hope and confidence, not only is it possible, but it's happening. It's happening on the globe. That there is a movement of sons turning to the Father, and it's organic and it's slow and steady, but it's working. And we will see a day where in the news headlines, you will see good stories of men at their posts bringing love and strength and heroism to women, to children, to communities, offering strength, not with a need to answer their question, but true strength offered in love because they know who they are. They've become kings because they've first become sons.
I love it. It's awesome. Good word. That's a good word.
That's exactly what. It's funny because he, like I said, we got off the interview a few weeks ago. He was like, I should ask them. We're like, yeah, you should have. So thank you for tonight. Thank you for all the words you shared with us. We really appreciate it. Your time and just all the words. Thank you.
Yeah. Great to be with you guys. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
All righty. Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks.